Labor trafficking is very prominent in North Carolina, and while there may be fewer approaches to reducing the demand for labor trafficking, there are still preventive actions to take. Salley has been tackling labor trafficking for many years. Y'all forgive me, I'm getting sleepy. And Pam Strickland strongly advocates for supporting fair trade. If you'd like to see some fair trade products, you can check out the items in the back of the room during our next break. Where's that at the back of the room? Make sure you know where that is. Point it out. It's over there in the corner, so make sure you go back there and check that out. I won't be introducing them, reading their bios. They want to do it themselves. These are professional people. Y'all put your hands together for Salley and Pam. For Scott and Pam.
That's a scary thought. I'm glad we had a break. Everybody's got water, fuel. Okay, that's great. This is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to try to take you back in time, a little chronological history to when I was, oh, you can't hear me? Oh, I'll get my drill instructor voice on. I'm going to take you back in time in a chronological order to when I was a child. And bear with me because it's probably before you were born. But I just want to say that during the late 1950s, 1960 era, I was raised in a very large county in southwest Florida. The name of the county is Collier, C-O-L-L-I-E-R. And it's in between Lake Okeechobee and the Everglades National Park. And at that time, it was mostly agriculture. The size of the county was 2,025 square miles, low tide. We were right on the Gulf of Mexico, so the tide meant a lot to us. But let me put that as a reference point. We were just a little bit smaller than the state of Delaware. A lot of land, a lot of land. During my childhood, agriculture, farming, was by far the most prominent business and employer in my county. Agriculture in the area was big business, very big business. Not what you would see in North Carolina, because Pam said, don't get people mixed up that you're from Florida and from North Carolina, so I footnoted that. These were very large farms. And we grew mostly row crops, watermelon, squash, but mostly tomatoes. And I keep on referring back to tomatoes, so bear with me. I'm using that as an analogy. In agriculture in southwest Florida, preparing the farm fields for row crops and nurturing the crops as they came up, stringing the crops. We would use bundles of string to tie, especially the tomatoes in rows with stakes in the ground, a lot of stringing. Harvesting was very, very important. If you worked on an agriculture farm or a facility that grows something, you have a very short window of time to harvest. And what that means, the reason I bring that up, that requires manual labor, lots and lots of manual labor. As a child and a teenager, I observed different labor camps. We called them labor camps. Migrants would come from the Caribbean, Central America, Mexico, all over to work the fields. We had to provide, or I did provide, transportation to and from those fields. They also have living facilities, and I say that there really weren't facilities. They were squalid, they were shacks. Sometimes there were old trailers, barely kept the rain off your back. Also, we brought in a lot of men from these different countries, and they lived in what we call flop houses. And the reason that's important, because they would work in the fields all day long, 10, 12, 14 hours a day, and they returned to the flop houses, not with much money. But some people, some traffickers, would charge these individuals for things like taking a shower, a mattress, and the list goes on and on. The mindset at that time, which could be still there, is we're doing a favor. We're giving jobs. We're providing jobs. We're harvesting food for us all to eat. And these migrant camps were under everybody. We saw them. I grew up going by migrant camps. They were, a dirt road goes in, there's fences, there's barbed wire, there were people for security walking around. And ironically, the biggest, largest migrant camp that was in this area was called Camp Happy. Camp Happy. Now we fast forward from that childhood of mine growing up, and we had literally thousands of people that came to work the fields. And I thought as a child, my friends thought that we were doing a good thing, providing jobs. We didn't know what was going on inside the fence. Fast forward to the 1990s, 20, 30 some years there. I came back to the same area as a law enforcement officer, working the same roads, the same farms, same people. There were a few improvements during that 30-some years before I came back. They now had to have portable bathrooms in the field. Portable bathrooms, that's a big thing, isn't it? You had to have transportation. You would see old school buses that were condemned by the school system, but were bought by these people, by the contractors. We didn't call them traffickers, we called them contractors, harvest contractors. And it was very important because everything was based on 32. Why 32? It's 32 seats on a bus. And if you don't have a place on the bus, you didn't work. You didn't work, you didn't pay the man. Not a good thing. There were penalties if you can't pay the man. So 32, that was the magic number. And if you missed a seat for whatever reason, there was always more than 3, 4, 5 people that would take your seat. So, the supply and demand for farm labor provided an opportunity for illegal farm workers by traffickers. It was opportunity versus risk. Low risk, high opportunity. Low risk, high opportunity. A lot of money can be made by exploiting these people. People were, and I'll go on to some slides, but again, I want to show you the chronological order. In 2002, still with the agency, with my sheriff's office, I was elected to go to FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. From Quantico, Virginia, I was reassigned to Budapest, Hungary. And when I was in Budapest, Hungary, our mission was twofold. The first part of the mission was to have an understanding, because of TVPA 2000, I was over 2001, 2002, why were we having all these babies and toddlers being moved, being shipped, being sold from the Balkans to the United States, Canada, Australia, and Germany, especially the United States? What we found, and this is my introduction to human trafficking, was that these organized crime groups, we have another term for them, but I'll say organized crime groups, would have run books. And they said, we need a 6-month-old, blonde hair, blue-eyed male to fill this position. go find them. There were so many of them that our government was saying, what's going on here? And when I returned, I had a commercial flight from Düsseldorf, Germany, back to Washington, D.C., Dulles Airfield. There were 25 taco-wrapped babies in the front gunnel of the plane coming back. And I saw when they were given to the families or to the attorneys what was going on, and that going rate for a toddler or a baby was $25,000. Then I said, this is nuts, this is crazy. But worse, I said, I'm a law enforcement officer. I'm going back to my agency in South Florida. But what I quickly realized is that I don't have to go halfway around the world to see human trafficking. I can go now to Camp Happy. Maybe it's not a clear analogy, but we didn't recognize that we had slavery, outright slavery going on, not only in Southwest Florida, but all over the United States in different forms. I just want to say that, and I'll get into the slide production, but the other day, my wife and I grocery shop with my wife, and we were walking to the fruit stand, and she goes, look at these tomatoes. Now, I should know something about tomatoes growing up in Immokalee. And they're perfect. There was maybe hundreds of these perfect red tomatoes and vine-ripe tomatoes. And I look back, and she goes, what's wrong? And I said, what you see is a perfect tomatoes, nice and red. They're all the same size and shape, said vine-ripe. I said, that's BS. I said, they're picked green. They're gassed with ethylene gas. They pick them green so they can ship them and they're not bruised. And I tell you, all I do is see little tiny children's hands that are green picking those tomatoes. And I'm going to explain little tiny green hands at the end of this. That's labor, that's slavery. So, if I may, did I do this right? Oh, I gotta go that way. No, I don't. Oh, here we go. Okay, definition of labor trafficking. I know a lot of you know this already, but it's good. It's a good refresher. The recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, advertising, maintaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, debt bondage, or slavery. That's the definition. I kind of group it all under fear, and I'm going to explain fear. Human trafficking versus human smuggling. We look at two columns here. If you look at human trafficking, and the reason I like to put this slide up, because when you listen to the news, they're interchangeable. They're football these terms all the time. And there's one station that does it consistently. But anyway, human trafficking, force, fraud, coercion used to manipulate victim. You go over to human smuggling, individuals consent to being smuggled. Crime committed against a person, crime against a country that they're trying to get into, is what we're seeing on the southwest border and other places. Trafficked person does not have to be moved or transported to be considered a victim of trafficking. We go requires being transported across international borders. And then for the last one, human trafficking, exploitation-based, human smuggling, transportation-based. Okay. Bonded labor. I'm going to talk about debt bondage. And this is what a lot of traffickers use, especially in, I'm going to refer back to agriculture. But again, we're going to talk about the different forms of labor, slavery, or servitude. Debt bondage or bonded labor is an abuse analogous to slavery in which individuals are pledged to work either for a money lender or a landlord to repay a debt or loan. It applies to children who work either for a moneylender or for a landowner as bonded laborers to pay off the debts of family members. In the agriculture field, when I was growing up, they would have the workers, whether or not they were slaves or were debt bonded individuals, they would have rings, and for every bucket of tomatoes, they would get a chit to put on there. At the end of the day, they would collect the chits and they get paid in cash. Also, when you have those little icons or chits, the transportation person, the straw boss, would say, I drove you here today and you will have a ride back home. That's 3 chits. So this is how it starts going down the line. You want a mattress to sleep on? That's a chit. You want to take a shower? That's a chit. You can see how progressively, there's not a lot of money to send back home. Forced labor. Forced labor has all work or service which is exacted from any person under the minutes of any penalty for its non-performance and for which the worker does not offer work or service voluntarily. Forced labor. Does that include the threat of forced labor? Remember at Camp Happy we had security. They didn't have guns or badges or handcuffs. They had baseball bats. Baseball bats. Now, if we ask them why they're carrying baseball bats, oh, we have wild dogs, we have to take care of that. If we ask the people inside the camp, we fear those people with baseball bats. The threat of being hurt. And then child labor. The term child labor is often defined as work that deprives children of their childhood, their potential, and their dignity, and that is harmful to physical and mental development. The one thing about slavery in the fields, the agricultural fields of where I was born, is that it doesn't matter if you're white or black or purple or white dots. What was the commonality was green hands. In farming, they had fungicides, insecticides, miticides, all kinds of carcinogenic chemicals that they sprayed to keep those tomatoes beautiful, vine ripe. But when you pick whether or not you're a 6-year-old boy or a 10-year-old girl or a grandparent, the commonality is that they didn't have gloves. They had green hands and it stained the skin and the nails and so forth. So here's a child who has little tiny green hands going to a school and they are targeted. So they're starving, they're slaves. Now we try to give them an education, but because they can't get this dye off their hands, what happens? You can just imagine. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, very, very quickly, we'll look at some percentages. Again, this is why we need a data committee. Statistics between COVID and between what's happening on the southwest border and other places. I'm just going to point out some of the percentages very quickly. Look between 2020 and 2021, economic abuse is 69%. Go down to emotional abuse for forced fraud and coercion, it's 23%. And you can just go down this column and see the increases. And I do want to talk about sexual abuse. You think these would be the top of the list, but I want to go to isolation. Isolation is 37%. What does isolation, how do you control your people that you have in slavery? You keep them away from communicating with family. You don't let them meet their family. You don't let them write letters. Isolation also is at these camps. At night when they come in and they go into their barracks, or whatever you want to call it, they remove their footwear, their boots, their shoes, what they wear. Why do you think they remove their shoes and footwear?
Can't run away.
You don't go far, without shoes, boots, and footwear. Another controlling aspect of slavery. All right. Okay, types of excuse me, I'm just going to get in front of you. First of all, recreational facilities, people clean the pools and so forth. Healthcare, doesn't mean they're going to be RN nurses that are trafficked, but they're the people that do the backroom stuff. Forestry and logging. Matter of fact, I just work on an international committee on what children and people who are enslaved for logging and timber, and one of the main countries that supplies slavery made products from wood or timber is from North Korea, which really shocked me. I didn't think anything came from North Korea, but that has popped up. Carnivals. Why would carnivals have people that are trafficked? Because they're very transient. There's no record keeping. A lot of things are done in cash if they are paid. Health and beauty services. Then we have a black square there, and I just want to bring up one thing, and I could go on for an hour on this, is that a lot of cults, occults, religious organizations that recruit people to work for them. I mean, Jonestown is one, Waco, Texas, but I had a first cousin from Central Florida who fell prey to one of these religious organizations, and she was with them for 12 or 13 years. She finally escaped in San Jose, California. But I said, what prompted you to escape? And she goes, I was in Las Vegas moving roofing shingles on top of a roof in Las Vegas, and she's only 120 pounds. And that was her job as a slave. Okay, very quickly, we go to peddling and begging, factories and manufacturing, commercial cleaning services, the janitorial service, especially in large cities, arts and entertainment, restaurants and food service. Again, who cleans the dishes? Who cleans the pots and pans? In a lot of these restaurants, you're starting to see it's almost universal. Traveling sales crews. I don't know, I haven't seen too many of that, but they knock on the door, no soliciting, but they knock on the door and they're trying to sell you something, you never get them away. Very aggressive. Bars, strip clubs, and cantinas. And the cantina is, we used the cantina in the agriculture community where we would go into, I didn't, the traffickers would have a cantina night, usually on Friday when they were paid, or Saturday or Mondays. That was 3 days that were paid. They go into a restaurant, everybody leaves, they put plastic on all the windows. They have their workers at the door to make sure no one goes in, goes out with their approval. They bring in the farm workers who were doing a good job for them, and they brought in young ladies to do dances and lap dances, $5 a dance, and they may have 300, 400, 500 men being entertained, and went on all night long. That also expanded to different types of vice, dog fighting, cockfighting, drugs, the list goes on. And my disclaimer is, in the next year or 2 years, 2024, 2025, you're going to hear more and more about this type of slavery. Either bond damage or labor servitude. It's, again, the sizzle, the hot topic now, of course, is sexual exploitation, but it's going to start surfacing. And I think, I predict that there's a commonality between labor servitude and sexual exploitation. Illicit activities, drug sales and so forth, landscaping. This can be tree cutting, arborist, landscaping, maintenance. Again, it's there. Hotels and hospitality, construction, domestic work, residential, outdoor solicitation, and then massage, illicit massage. There are some very nice, legal massage operations in our country. They're getting a hit right now with all the illicit massage things that are going on. And again, that's another conversation. Okay. Gender of likely victims by form labor only. You can see, again, it's dated, dated data, but you can see the increase with male, 48% versus 22% for female. And why is that? Well, if you look at the agriculture community, it's mostly male. Okay. Immigration status of likely victims, labor only. We got domestic 3%, foreign national 73%, then unknown 25%. That unknown most likely will probably rise in percentage because of what's happening today. Okay, 2021 only. If you look at who are the traffickers, look at employer, 57%. Family member, yes, family members can be trafficking, just like you have in sexual exploitation. 11%. Friend, acquaintance, coworker, 10%. And then you have the labor recruiter or contractor. I was talking about the contractor. A lot of legal farm owners and businesses, agriculture businesses, say, I just need 60 people in the field to pick the crops. They go to a contractor goes to a subcontractor, and sometimes some of those people are brought in illegally. So you may have the CEO of a company may not even know that they're supporting an illegal activity. All right, then smugglers. All right. How were they trafficked? We'll look at false promises and fraud, 14%. That's almost conservative. Job offer, advertisement, 72%. And then smuggling related, 9%. Okay, vulnerabilities to labor trafficking. Very simply, or 6 of them, need a job. Want a better life. We hear this over and over again. Want a better life. Come to the United States, get a better job, or a better life, excuse me. Want to send money home. With the people that I had in my community, they never went to banks. First of all, they didn't understand banks. And they would be paid in cash, and they held on to it. But that's a problem because when they went out, they got robbed. So, want to send money home, that was their intention, but they were also targeted to be a victim. Immigrant status, poverty, homelessness. Vulnerabilities of labor trafficking, lack of education. Education just doesn't mean high school degree or whatever. It's the education of the law. What, as someone who's coming to the United States doesn't know the language or the customs, they're going to be very, very short on knowing what they can do and what they legally can do. Lack of status, culture barrier, language barrier, of course, not understanding their rights. Labor trafficking in North Carolina, again, remember, we have 223 cases to 340. It's growing, but remember, one case may involve 8 or 9 people for one of those numbers. So it's a little, if you just look, that's not 340 people. That's just number of cases. Okay, total North Carolina cases, labor and sex trafficking, unfortunately, they got mixed. Adults 149, minors 51, females 180, males 25. And then we look at foreign nationals versus U.S. citizen. Types of trafficking. Wow, sex. That's what we've been talking about all day long. But I'm telling you, and again, I'll repeat this, and again, it's my opinion, not demand reduction. Labor is, once we start identifying it, once we start understanding more and more about this, because I still go back to opportunity versus risk. And right now the risk is low and the opportunity is high. Venues of labor trafficking, domestic work, agriculture, farms, and then we have other. And that could be in the restaurant business, hotel business. It can be a lot of different businesses that see that opportunity versus risk. Top industries in North Carolina, we have domestic work and agriculture. But I will point out, talking about little green hands, children's green hands. See that farm worker? Does he have gloves? Versus the lady doing the domestic work has gloves. You think putting someone out in the field with carcinogenic chemicals, you at least give them some form of protection. Okay, this is Johnson-Sampson County. This is the farm worker unit filed lawsuit in federal court in the Eastern District of North Carolina on behalf of 8 H2A farm workers. You have H2A alpha, H2B Bravo. H2A alpha, alpha is for agriculture, B is for other forms of work. And basically, these were 8 farm workers, H2A farm workers, that for some reason, they got together and they filed a lawsuit against these agriculture entities. They won $75,000 split upon 8 of them, and then they had to pay the attorneys. It really wasn't a magical number for them, but what I see is that they no longer are going to be able to work for a farm in North Carolina. Labor trafficking in North Carolina again, we have Greene County. We talked about the charge on lawful recruitment fees. Workers did not get what they were promised, subjected to threats and coercive manipulation to keep working. That's a nice fancy word for you're my slave. Confiscated their passports. First thing someone does, straw boss comes up. We use the term straw boss for the trafficker. They come in and says, let me see your paperwork if you have any. Confiscated their passports. I haven't seen too many passports with farm workers, but maybe it has changed. And U.S. lawfully under the H-2A guest worker program, are they here legally? Have they filed the work? Most of the time, not really. This is a case, again, labor trafficking. This has nothing to do with agriculture. This was in Mecklenburg County. This lady had another lady working for her, and she did all kinds of horrendous things to her, even physical abuse. But trafficker was a family member, infliction of a mental and physical abuse. She would use different things they used for cutting nails and so forth, and pinch her and make her bleed and all that kind of stuff. Falsely claimed that the victim owed her a debt of $180,000. That was a contrived number. There's no validation why that came up, but she had to work to pay off her debt. Falsely alleged victim's poor work performance. She kept on saying, you're not doing well, you're not doing good. She's working 10, 12, 14, a lot, 6 out of 7 days. Treated victim in a humiliating and demeaning fashion. And Loing's coercive scheme caused the victim to fear Long. And again, fear is a term that we don't talk about often, but is used to manipulate. That's what I have on labor. I want to introduce Pam Strickland.
Testing. This is working now. Testing.
Mm-hmm.
Testing? Well, good afternoon. I want to say congratulations to all of y'all for sticking with us this far. So thank you for being here. Thank you to Scott, who did a great job of kind of giving us an overview of labor trafficking. And as I mentioned earlier during the panel, you know, the reason we felt that was so important is because it's so rarely done. right? Even in the anti-human trafficking movement, a lot of us just do not understand what it looks like. So putting the numbers up here and having you be able to see, well, these are the industries it's happening in, and these are the methods, and these are the people that are actually doing it. And so you notice that it was employers, not surprisingly, when you're talking about labor trafficking. So just wanted to give y'all sort of an overview of that. And so the piece that I'm going to talk to you about is supply chains. And that's something that I'm willing to bet most of us had never even considered what a supply chain was before COVID, right? And then when COVID happened, that was the excuse for why we didn't have toilet paper, right? And why, we didn't have various products, everything, and that's why all the prices went up, right? It was all supply chain. And I don't know about y'all, but I was kind of, what the heck? What does that actually mean? And what we need to sort of understand is what one is and how it works to figure out how is that related to labor trafficking, and how is that related to the products that I have in my house? Where did they come from? Who made them or harvested them? And under what circumstances? So I wanted to give you a little information on that. So this is just a quick, easy definition of a supply chain. A network between a company and its suppliers to produce and distribute a specific product to the final buyer. It includes different activities, people, entities, information, and resources. So when we talk about the supply chain, it's getting a product from China, where a lot of our products are coming from, all the way here, and who's involved in it and what happens along the way. A big phrase in the labor trafficking world is supply chain transparency. And so what do we mean by that, and why would that be important? So supply chain transparency requires companies to know what is happening upstream in the supply chain and to communicate this knowledge both internally and externally. So it's not enough to know that I bought this product from Scott, and Scott's a good guy, and I know that he's not a labor trafficking victim, and he didn't traffic anybody. Okay, well, where did Scott get it from? And where did that person get, all the way up the line? And then it says it's important to communicate this internally and externally. So within our own company that's doing the distribution, and our customers deserve to know where we are getting these products made. So, when we talk about why is it important, I think some of these incidents y'all will remember. The Rana Plaza factory collapse. Remember that? All those thousands of people in that sewing factory that died. And it came out then at that time, all these brands that we were buying that are hanging in our closets were having things sewn there, right? Slave labor in the Thai seafood industry. There have been numerous accounts of ships that were using exclusively slave labor, and then they're bringing that seafood here to the U.S. and we're eating it. Worker suicides. We heard about, in Apple's supply chain. And then the Uzbek cotton that was harvested with child labor. So all of these things kind of made the news, and the companies that were using, this tainted, we'll say, supply chain, this tainted labor, got really bad publicity for it. And so that sort of generated this idea of, man, we really need to be figuring out what's happening upstream in our supply chain. What has been discovered, too, through research is that some consumers are actually willing to pay more to know that they are not buying a product that was made by exploited labor, and that consumers are willing to pay more for supply chain transparency. Consumers value information about the treatment of workers in their product supply chain. And they value that the seller is working towards improvements. Across industries, this growing segment of discerning consumers seeks information. We want to know, what are the ingredients in this thing I'm buying? Where do they come from? And the conditions in which they were produced. So again, why is this important? So a lack of supply chain transparency can now stop businesses cold. For example, shipments that are missing their origin papers or documents can be held up at the ports, causing costly disruptions that ripple through the supply chain. A specific example of this is the U.S. Borders and Protection Agency turns around shipments that are originating in North Korea and a couple of other countries. But we have recent legislation that stipulates that all North Korean labor should be considered forced labor. Whoa. That's serious. And so when it comes here, even if that's not the country of origin, if it's proven that somewhere along the line it came from North Korea, it's not getting in the U.S., it's getting stopped at the port. In 2017, the president signed into law the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, which imposed sanctions not only on North Korea, but also on Iran and Russia. So, we've talked about some folks who do it wrong. So what does doing it right look like? So Patagonia is a company that is very forward-thinking along this lines. And this is a page from their website. And I don't think I can actually access it from the slide. But if we could click on these red dots, it actually takes you to information about a specific factory. And it tells you how many people are working there, what the product is that they make. So you can actually say, you know, you can look on a label, you know, I bought this jacket from Patagonia. It was made at this factory. This many people work there, so that you have a better feel for where things are coming from. Another company that is really trying to make progress in this area, you probably have not heard of Ahold Delhaize, but I bet everybody in here has been to a Food Lion, right? So this is the huge conglomerate that owns a number of grocery stores, including Food Lion. And so I pulled out a piece of their policy on this. Suppliers shall not engage in any form of forced, bonded, or trafficked labor, period. And that's where most companies stop. If I'm buying it from Scott, I know he didn't engage in any forced labor. It's the next sentence that's super important. Suppliers will risk allegations of complicity if they benefit from the use of such forms of labor by their business partners. So we're talking about going up the supply chain now, right? So, and they're doing a lot of work to try to be very transparent. And one thing that I really appreciated, Scott and I did a webinar on this last fall, and we had, I forget his title, something like ethics compliance officer was on our webinar. And he was really honest and said, this is our goal. But he acknowledged we have, I forget how many thousands of suppliers. He said, we're working towards this, and we're being transparent that we're working towards it, but it's not something you can do overnight because these systems are so in place, like Scott was telling us about in Florida, you can't change it overnight. But what we want to do is support businesses that are making efforts. So what can we do? What can we as consumers do? So some of you have stopped by our table and have seen some pretty stuff sitting on our table back there. And all of that is fair trade certified. And I hope some of y'all were familiar with that term before you got here. But in case you're not, I always give the short definition of slave-free and child labor-free. The people were paid a fair living wage, no matter what country they're in. It's also kind of given the name to the whole movement of supporting that idea of paying people fairly and treating people fairly. So, they have a long list of criteria for something to get the Fair Trade certification, but I'm just going to highlight a couple of them that relate specifically to our topic today. Fair payment. Equal pay for equal work by women and men, and a local living wage. Now, fair trade is certifications that's given to things that are made in other countries. I wonder if we were to think about products in our own lives or services, how many of us could say that every product or service that we enjoy was provided by someone that's earning a fair living wage? I mean, it's not happening, right? Ensuring no child labor or forced labor. And then the final one, ensuring good working conditions. And of course, they actually define those, but we didn't want to get too down in the weeds. So how do I know if this product I'm buying is fair trade certified or not? So here's some labels that you can look for. The things that you can find most commonly are coffee, tea, chocolate, and sugar. And now some of you are out there thinking, well, you know, the grocery store I go to, they don't have any fair trade certified stuff. I live in Farmville, population 4,500. I do most of my shopping at a Food Lion, and they have fair trade certified products. All right? So I promise you, if you start looking for it, yours does too. And if you're lucky enough to be in a town that has, you know, Harris Teeter and Publix and Fresh Market and those kinds of things, they definitely do. So I would invite you to begin to look for those. Sometimes they're a little more expensive, y'all. Are you one of the consumers that's willing to pay a little bit more to ensure that a product that you're consuming was made or harvested by someone paid a fair living wage? I hope you are. So this is a supply chain, a conventional supply chain of the coffee industry. And we're not going to go through it in depth. I just kind of want you to get the general idea of see how many steps there are there, right? So it'd be really hard to ensure at each of those steps that everyone was paid a fair wage, everyone was treated right? It's hard for it to be transparent when you've got that many steps. The cool thing about fair trade and its supply chain is you reduce a lot of that. The idea is that the farmer, in the case of a farmed product, is able to keep more of the product because there aren't so many different levels to go through, right? That everybody has to get their cut. So it's a smaller supply chain. So the next thing I wanted to mention to y'all, so we've talked a little bit about fair trade. Has anyone ever heard of the Fair Food Program? Shockingly, my team has heard of it. And Scott has heard of it because it started in Immokalee, Florida. So, it started with a group called, let me get the name right, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, CIW. So it is worth Googling sometime to learn about this super courageous group of farm workers that decided we do have rights. We are human beings. And they've just done some incredible work. They even go around the country doing training. I benefited from one of those several years ago myself. So they came up with the Fair Food Program, which rewards farmers that aspire and that accomplish the idea of paying and treating their workers fairly. And part of the way it works is that workers are given rights and they can confidently report problems. The growers are taught how to address those problems, and then we as consumers benefit from an ethical supply chain. So here is a list of the retailers that are involved with it. And you see Ahold USA is at the top, and a number of pretty familiar businesses. So the primary product that the Fair Food program impacts is tomatoes. However, there are others. And so this is exciting to me to see all these really well-known, really large national companies that commit to purchasing from the Fair Food program when it's available. The problem is not every produce item is available. And the thing I wanted to show y'all is I'm happy that we have 2 North Carolina farms on the list, but wouldn't it be great if we had more than 2? So any of y'all that are involved in agriculture or have family or friends that are a part of the agriculture industry, I would just encourage you to mention this Fair Food program to them. Have them Google it, learn information about it, and see if they might consider trying to meet the criteria so that they could be considered for it. And here are the things they have to agree to. Guaranteed wages and hours, freedom from retaliation if you make a report, health and safety protections. I'm guessing they wear gloves, Scott. Of course, the COVID-19 piece got added in. And then heat stress illness prevention and response is the most recent thing that they have added to that. So that's sort of the piece of it. We wanted to give you just an overview about what labor trafficking looks like and what a supply chain is and what why we want them to be transparent. And then as a part of this webinar series that we had last fall, in the final one, we invited several experts, and we said, as a demand reduction task force, our intention is to create a comprehensive plan to reduce demand for sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Help us figure this out. What are some elements that we need to include in such a comprehensive plan? So I'm going to share with you what they said to us. One of our experts was Christine Shaw-Long, who's the executive director of the Human Trafficking Commission. And she gave really a kind of a big picture answer. She said, we need to provide incentives to make employers and businesses want to follow the law. She said a carrot approach as opposed to a stick approach. And she said, really, one of the first things we need to do is examine what our statutes look like now. What do our statutes and our policies that are related to labor exploitation look like? Do we have adequate policies already that simply aren't being enforced? And so the third thing is, so if we do have the adequate policies, how do we get them enforced? What steps are necessary for that to happen? And if the policies that we have are not adequate, begin that process of change. And we heard from Senator Alexander this morning that he personally, and he believes that his colleagues are willing to hear from us about this, right? That they want to improve things. So we really appreciated what Christine had to say sort of about a big picture approach. We had a couple of other experts who really wanted to focus on the workers' rights aspect of labor trafficking. And some of them had lived experience of trying to serve farm workers and being denied access to go to these labor camps, which is illegal, by the way. But so these workers have the right to have visitors at these labor camps, including service providers like legal aid, for instance. They should have the right to speak out about bad conditions without fear of reprisal. They should have freedom of assembly, and they should have freedom of movement. And, things that we hear that happen at some of these labor camps is, they do have armed guards there. They can't leave. As was mentioned in the cases that Scott shared with us, the contractors will very often take any documentation that the workers have. So many of the workers do have H-2A visas, so they're here legally, but they're still really vulnerable because they don't understand what their rights are. Another element that our experts focused on is holding employers accountable. And one suggestion was that they should have serious fines. One is that they would be unable to participate in the future in the H-2A visa program. And the third is criminal charges. And poor law enforcement, all day we've talked about how we want to train law enforcement. We've got to find more hours in the day for them. But one of the people on our panel actually talked about how she had gone to a migrant labor camp to assess situations, meet with some of the farm workers there, and were met at the gate and told they could not enter. And the farm employees, the contractor, the foreman, called the local sheriff's office and had the service provider removed by the sheriff. Okay, so this definitely requires training because the sheriff's office wasn't aware, apparently, of the right that the workers had to have guests, and were providing protection to the wrong entity in this particular case, right? Law enforcement responsibility is to protect the rights of workers and service providers, and not only the rights of the farmer or the employer. So these were a lot to take in. I understand that. As I mentioned, we just felt it was so important that you all hear something about labor trafficking. We want to get it on your radar. We hope that this will generate some interest. We want to have a team that specifically is addressing labor trafficking. And so if you are interested in that, please let us know. This ends my portion of it. I'm going to invite Scott to come up with me. And if you all have questions about labor trafficking, about these suggestions that were made, or about the supply chain, please let us know.
Thank you very much.
One, two, three, one, two.
Is there, and forgive me because I know very little about this. Is there, which regulatory body should really be going in and doing, annual checks? I'm thinking of the way, Department of Health and Human Services goes in annually to restaurants and gives them a sanitation grade. Is there the same?
Oh, you know, here you go.
It's okay.
Is there the same type of regulatory body that would go onto farms, for instance, and kind of peek around and look and make sure? Because in my mind, as just a citizen, I would expect there to be something like that, and I'm kind of horrified that there's.
So the local county health department has to go out to these migrant camps and assure that there are showers and bathrooms and that kind of thing there. They do this before the workers arrive. Which obviously you want all that to be working before the workers arrive, but it would be nice to have someone to come to see how the workers are being treated. So that's one code enforcement type thing. The other thing is, of course, the Department of Labor is responsible for for overseeing all this. And the last time anyone had a discussion about this that I was a part of, there were 2 people for the whole state. 2. So you can see that As Scott said earlier about the risk being low and the opportunity being high, there's very little risk.
Pam, do you mind if I address the massage board really quickly on that question? So the state has, I don't need that, buddy.
Yeah, you
The
do,
state-
because we're recording it.
So the state has a massage board that has a criminal investigation wing. The gentleman was actually here in an NC State shirt. He's the only person with any taste in the room apparently, but he's left. But if you have an illicit massage parlor, you think it's an illicit massage parlor, and they advertise openly because they're almost untouched by most law enforcement agencies, you can contact North Carolina Massage Board and let them know. The nice thing with them is they have regulatory authority, which means that they can go in and conduct an inspection without a search warrant. And then once they uncover criminal activity, which they're almost certain to uncover, then they're able to contact law enforcement, and then we partner with them to bring charges. And a lot of times with massage parlors, we find that they're also linked to nail salons and Asian restaurants as well. Been several cases where the same owners have been linked to each industry because the dominant population that works in those locations is obviously Asian. So if you see a massage parlor, it's advertising a massage, and you're looking at it and you're like, man, that kind of looks like a shady spot, you can contact the massage board and they'll go in and initiate an investigation.
If I could add to that, so a couple of weeks ago, I did a webinar on illicit massage businesses, and so did a lot of research into the body work board that you just mentioned. They don't want you to call them every time you have a suspicion, okay? So first of all, they've got a list on their website. You can go in and, for instance, put Greenville, and there'll be a list of the certified massage businesses there. So you'd want to start there and see if they're listed. If they don't have, if they're not listed on there, then perhaps they would want you to call them. We are recommending to people to check out what your codes in your local city are and find out the code enforcement perspective there as well. What I have discovered in Pitt County and Greenville is that our codes are extremely outdated and don't reflect the new laws that our General Assembly passed just a couple of years ago that make it really easy to determine what's legal and what's not. So something that you might want to check into. If you are particularly interested in this, we're doing part 2 of our illicit massage business webinar on May 15th. And so would love to have you tune in for that as well. Thank you for bringing up the massage business.
My question is for Scott. I saw your experience was with Catholic Charities in Charlotte. Can you speak a little bit about the human trafficking division you were in, how it was formulated, how long they've been around, what they're doing, and do you see, does that exist in the Diocese of Raleigh as well?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. First of all, the individuals that we try to protect keep the information very close to the chest. It is not their culture to complain. It is not their culture to go to the police to complain. A lot of different reasons why. Okay, so what we try to do is be the bridge between different groups. A lot of them are in the church and so forth, and it takes time to develop a positive relationship with someone who's been trafficked or whose kids are being trafficked or whatever it may be. So if you're looking for speed, don't wear a watch. We work by the calendar. It takes time to develop that relationship. That's 90% of the battle. Once you start talking and having a conversation, then we can start moving in and finding out who the traffickers are and so forth. But right now, we don't have different facilities or homes for victims of trafficking. But on the international side of labor trafficking, we also educate on that. Everything from Indonesia with the ships and fishing to every country seems to have some problem with that. So right now it's mostly education awareness. Because of our positive relationship with them, we can take it to the authorities. Does that answer?
Do they have that program with the Archdiocese of Raleigh as well?
No. It's matter of fact, we've been trying to convince the archdiocese or the Diocese of Raleigh to form a human trafficking committee similar to the one we have in Charlotte. Yeah, it's needed. Hold on, let's get a mic on now. You could be on TV tonight, so. Oh, okay.
I guess my question is about reporting labor trafficking. It doesn't seem like there's a very good reception for that or maybe action towards it. Who are we supposed to be reporting to if we find something that we're suspicious of?
Well, you always have the toll-free number, which you can do with labor trafficking, just like you do sexual exploitation. The police, city police, or the sheriff's office, they may already have a team set up, but you wouldn't know about it. So that's the second place I would go. And then Department of Labor. And really, those are the three I would choose right now. But there's other agencies out there that handle human, especially the debt servitude. They're always interested in that because everyone's entitled to a fair and equal pay. Bring up the mic.
I just wanted to make a comment, Pam. Thank you for sharing about fair food, fair trade. I've learned some new words today, and they're actionable words, so I can go back and look for fair food in the supermarket. I also wanted to say I feel better now. I was mentioning that I did a couple of purchases as a gift from the fair trade. So I feel much better having been educated about what it means. So thank you.
Yeah. May I add something to the fair trade, fair food, fair pay? It's been my observation, my experience working with youth groups, teenagers, middle school and high school. They seem to grasp the idea of fair trade, of doing something against human trafficking much faster, much quicker, more effectively than their parents. It's amazing if you have a youth group in your church or whatever, talk about this. And they want to get involved, but they don't know how to fight it. And this is a good way to fight human trafficking. All right.
Anybody else?
I had a question from like when you first started talking. You were talking about like the servitude for labor trafficking in Florida and what your experiences were with it. And a familiar idea came up with, what do you call it? Sponsors. Is that kind of like the same thing?
With sponsors?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm deaf. So.
Oh, no, with sponsors. So
Oh,
like,
responders.
no, sponsors.
Sponsors.
Right, when people can have a sponsor for a child that's from a different country and then they come into America based on a sponsorship, and you were talking about like, you know, the babies and things such as
Oh,
that.
you're talking about when I was in Europe, they coming
Yeah.
over. It was all legal. Everything was legal about it. But what we started delving into, what made it legal was our laws were not current. Our laws were not changed at that time. TVPA 2000 really set the tone. Thank goodness for that. And so right after TVPA was finally passed in Congress, we went over to Europe. But it was interesting. I never heard the term human trafficking, never heard the term victim, survivor, whatever. We had babies and toddlers that were being sold for this amount of money. And I didn't really go into how did we have so many orphans that were available? Well, orphans don't have mom and dad. So basically the way it works is that I would come to this fine lady and said, I want to buy your son. You can't have him. You can't have him. Then she disappears. Now we have an orphan. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's a very simplistic way of explaining it, but I didn't get it until I was boots on the ground and saw what was occurring. But supply and demand
because of the demand, the supply was over the pond. Did I answer your question, or?
When you were talking to her and you're like, can I have your baby? And she said no. Was it because they belonged to the state because they were unclaimed by a parent or guardian?
Oh, no, no, no. Mom and dad says no, then they disappear. They're now orphans.
It's happened in several countries.
Oh, got me? I tell you, I'm really trying to clean this up, and my language sometimes varies.
Yeah, no, don't clean it up.
Okay. But it was, again, I never would have recognized it as a law enforcement officer until I actually saw it and how it worked. And I think what's surprising is that we were sold run books. We call them run books. This is the child we want. This is the description. We need it this date. There's no human dignity. There's no human respect. They were product. They were product.
So in agriculture or in grocery stores or different types of businesses, if you are already running smoothly, you're following the law, things are great for you, what incentives do you have to go through the process of becoming fair trade certified?
Yeah, on fair trade? Pam, did you hear that?
So if you're a grocery store and things are great, why would you begin to sell fair trade certified products?
Going through the process to be certified.
So the certification is not of a particular business. So it's not that the grocery store is certified fair trade. The products individually are certified. So for instance, I've been in a grocery store that had fair trade bananas, right? But not all of their produce was fair trade. So the grocery store itself was not fair trade certified, but they sold products that were fair trade certified.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Anybody else? Thank y'all so much.
Yeah,
You've been
thank you.
great.